Hello everyone, welcome to today's video where I will be breaking down the first pages of other people's comics. I've grabbed a handful of pages from some viewer submitted comics, and if you yourself are interested in submitting your comic for future videos where Bones and I will break down what folks do well, what needs improvement, gab about your comic, you can join our Discord. There should be a link down below. You can submit your comic under the art and comic submission section, and maybe we'll pick it and go over it in one of these videos. So check that out if you're interested. Now, everyone that I've chosen for today's video, their stuff will be linked down below. Make sure to check that out as well. Everyone did a really amazing job. So for our first comic page, I have the first page of a comic called Wasted Water by Squabosaurus, and I ended up choosing this page because I thought it was a really great example of a very atmospheric first page. So throughout this comic, there aren't any words, it's a silent comic, and it relies heavily on like atmosphere and facial expressions, character emotion. There's some interesting world building. There's lots of like visual storytelling because there aren't any captions, pieces of dialogue to tell us what's going on. And I thought they did such a great job with setting up this vibe for the story. We open up, we see our little title card, and then the first couple of... It's hard with a vertical comic. I wanted to say the first couple of panels. This is probably like 2 panels or a splash page in traditional comic page format. But I just grabbed the first few that really felt like it worked together. But we really descend down from the sky. We look at these trees. We follow this vapor or smoke that's going down. There's all this sludge and gloop going down. It looks very alien. And we come down to a panel where we focus on our main character, who's this little silhouette here. And then we transition to the next panels by using like the gloop and tree roots in the environment. It's just very, very atmospheric. It sets up a lot of world building questions like, where are we? This person looks like they're in military gear or spy gear or tactical gear, I guess. And all we're getting is a silhouette. So there's lots of mystery. There's intrigue about, what is like with these vapor air things? Why is everything so gloopy? It's bringing up a lot of interesting questions, and it's setting the mood of this world up. And I think they just did an amazing job with creating atmosphere. A lot of it is done through the shapes used, through the mystery of only revealing like a silhouette and really focusing on the environment as we kind of zoom in to our story, as we descend from the treetops into where we're focusing in on the story. I think that's just a really easy way to get into this comic that is so reliant on the environments. And it's a really great example of using a vertical comic page as well to great effect. You control a lot of what your reader sees with how much information you put in one screen size because instead of using page turns, you are having people scroll to see what's going to happen next in your comic. So I really like how in Wasted Water, they really drew out the space as we descend into this alien world. I like how it really lets you settle in as you scroll down. The one thing I would say I would note is just to be a little careful with contrast. I really like how they've made a frame around the silhouette of our main character. It does a good job of bringing our attention to it. And I do appreciate that this like frame made out of the trees and the smoke has framed everything in like a light color. And then within the shadows and the silhouette, we have these darker colors. The only thing is that I think the contrast just needs to be heightened a little bit when it comes to like the silhouette of this character. They are the darkest spot here, but there's also some kind of darker tones like in here that kind of steal some of the attention. So it's like extremely minor, but I think heightening the contrast within this a little bit so that it's a little easier to see the silhouette, I think would go a long way with creating that atmosphere and that mystery. But overall, this is so atmospheric. I love all the shapes. It's a really, really great example of a very atmospheric, kind of slow build beginning. So great work. You should all check out Squabosaurus and their comic Wasted Water on Webtoon. Link below. For our second comic, I grabbed the first page from Renes Dream by Sauce Pereire. The reason I chose it is that it's a really nice example of a starting page that's really focused on our character and their emotion. So for context, this first scene starts with Renee waking up, and in the next page, after this last panel here, we see Renee looking out over like an ocean, like his bed is sitting in an ocean, and it's clear that we're in this nightmare that he's having. But I really liked the pace and setup of this first page. It focuses really, really well on our character, and I like the slow pace of it. It's not jumping right into him waking up in the nightmare. Well, I guess revealing to the audience it's a nightmare. Because this page on its own, it could just be a character waking up in their bed. But I like that there's a slow reveal where we get 2 panels of him slowly waking. They're very similar in shape and size. In fact, they're near identical, with the exception that his eyes are opening and his hand has moved a little bit in the second panel, to show that not a lot of time has passed between eyes closed, eyes open. So that's really great. Then we get him sitting up, and then we have his reaction looking surprised as he looks what's past the bedspread that we haven't seen yet. It's a nice little setup of tension before it's revealed to the reader, like, oh, this is surreal. We're in a nightmare, we're in a dream. So yeah, I thought it was just very nice, very character focused, a really good example of focusing on like the emotion of a character before you start giving all the details about what's going on in your scene. It's very in media res, which means like in the middle of the action, and really focusing on a character. The only little thing I would say when you are working on a page that has a single character or a small amount of characters repetitively, instead of say like showing a character's face and then showing like an environment instead of this character, we have this page where it's all focused on our character, his emotion, what he's feeling, what he's going through. When you have a repetition like this, I would just be careful of the size of your character within the composition. The only issue I have with this page is the third panel and the fourth panel. Our character Renee, he's the same size in both. Like it takes up about, I mean, he's taking up different amounts of space within that panel, where he's got more negative space around him in the fourth panel, but size-wise, he's about the same. Just to create a bit more visual interest, I would play around with the size a little bit. For example, either one you could make a little bit smaller. I would honestly go for this one. As he sits up, maybe we can see a little bit more information on this side. He could be made a little bit smaller, just so that you avoid any repetition, things feeling too the same panel to panel. So that is just something that I noticed with this one. I think it's something to think about with any page that anyone is working on. Be careful that your characters are different sizes, different lengths away from the camera, as it were. Just something to be mindful of. But overall, for one, the art of this comic is gorgeous, and this is a great starting page, just focusing on our character. And like I said, this comic, Renes Dream, is linked down below. Please go give it some love. Now for my final example of a really great first page, comes from Thunderstar, which is a comic by Ryan Light. Now this is like an adventure comic. It's set in space. We've got like a space captain main character who's going on adventures. There's clearly some big adventures being set up. We start with this page, which is a really great, like, it honestly reminds me of like the text crawl on the start of like a Star Wars film, where it just lays out like, here's what's happening in the world before we step into a smaller view of the world and we focus on one character. So this is a good little introduction to the world. It gives a really great adventure vibe before, as the scene continues, we really focus in on our main character. Why I think this makes such a really great first page. For one, the use of color is really, really great. It's very attention grabbing. It's got immaculate space adventure vibes, and I think that comes down to the text choices, the color choices. The composition is very reminiscent of, you know, old sci-fi fantasy movie posters and book covers. I'm gonna keep coming back to Star Wars, even though I don't know if that's necessarily the inspiration, but, you know, it feels like looking at a Star Wars poster. And I think that sets up the genre really well. If I'm a reader who's clicking into this to read it, I can see like, oh, this is an adventure title, this is a sci-fi title, we've got planets, we've got space lasers, spaceships, really sci-fi looking text. Like, I know what I'm getting into as a reader. I think it sets up the genre and the atmosphere really, really well through color choices, through how dynamic everything is. I love the use of overlapping imagery, where we have like our villain here, we have the old king here, we've got a little flash version of like a hero and maybe a princess, and then we've got the spaceships flying through. I love the contrast between like the purples and blues versus like the reds and oranges. And I like how it's all juxtaposed together, where it's clear like this isn't a scene that's happening together. It's little flashes of different vignettes of scenes that are being all transposed together to highlight the text that's going on. And I think flow-wise, it does bring you through the page really well, just following the text and the characters and the composition down through the text. And even though it is a very like text-heavy page, I think these wonderful visuals really help highlight what's being written. And it's just one page where we get this like text crawl, so it's not, you know, as a reader, I'm not sitting through a novel before I get into like the action and get attached to a character. But this does a really great job of setting up the world and the vibes. The only thing I would say is I think some of the text, I mostly noticed it here over the old king and over the evil general. I think just having the white text and the shadow background, I think having just those isn't quite enough contrast, where with all the lines and colors going on behind them, they can be a little difficult to read. And that can be easily fixed by adding an outline, making the shadow thicker and darker, maybe toning down some of the contrast going on here in the background, just so that your text is easy to read on top. But I think the text is really well integrated into the image. I think just some contrast stuff might need to be added. And that's always something to think about when you're placing down text, is making sure that there's good contrast between your text and the background so that the text is very legible on top of whatever it is. But yeah, really, really great starting page. Great setting up atmosphere, vibes, story, all that good stuff. And if you're interested in reading Thunderstar, it'll be linked down below. So hopefully this was helpful for folks. The first page of your comic can be really, really difficult to pull off. There's a lot to consider, like your genre, like the atmosphere, what will grip the readers. There's so many different ways to make your first page that there's no real right way. You just have to make it suit your story. Because as we can see with like between these, where we have one where it's like really environmentally focused, it's very vibes focused, it's a very like slow crawling beginning, versus something that, in our second example, is more of like a romance, kind of softer fantasy story where we're really focused on the character and their emotions versus like an adventure style comic that is bombastic and big and we know it's going to cover the galaxy kind of thing. Where all of these are great examples of what they're doing, and they're all so different, but they're all correct. You know, there's so many different ways to do it, but hopefully this does give some ideas on where to go if you're struggling with your first page. And I think sometimes when you're working on your comic, it's best to make your first page at the end. Bones and I do typically recommend that people write out their full script before they start making their comic. That's not always doable. An outline will also work, but understanding everything that's going to happen in your story will really help you understand where specifically to start your story and will help you make the perfect first page. So hopefully this was helpful. Thank you for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe for more videos like this. And as I said at the beginning, if you would like to have us possibly grab your comic as an example to help teach people about how to make comics, you can join our Discord and leave it in the art and comic submission section. And Bones and I will maybe grab it for a video. That's it for me. Goodbye.